I never imagined that the man who once swore to protect me would casually take a sip of wine, watching as a strange woman tossed a brown envelope onto our family dinner table and boldly announced that my unborn child was the result of an affair. What he and his wealthy family didn't know was that on the very night they kicked their pregnant daughter-in-law out of the house with a forged DNA test, they handed me the exact key to destroy their entire legacy. And when he walked into the mediation room a few weeks later with a triumphant smirk, thinking he was about to strip away all my rights as a mother, his own mother's credit card statement, along with federal perjury charges, was already waiting on the table. Because sometimes a woman's silent breakdown isn't a sign of weakness, it's just her quietly setting an inescapable trap. Before we continue, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell as we post new stories every day. Please leave a like and comment down below the city you're watching from. My name is Ashley. I am 36 years old and is a senior administrative manager. I've always prided myself on my ability to keep everything under control, building a disciplined life organized down to the very last detail. I spent years biting my tongue in my marriage to Daniel, swallowing his family's subtle insults just to keep the peace in our home. When I got pregnant with our first child, I thought I had finally earned my place in their family. Or so I thought. Until that autumn night when I realized I was never truly a wife. I was just prey in a ruthless, calculated plot to secure a family trust fund. Vanessa deserves to be heard. The words hung in the air, crisp and sterile, dropping like heavy stones into the dead silence of the dining room. The silence of the ultra-wealthy is unlike that of ordinary people. It doesn't come with shocked gasps or frantic whispering. It is a thick, suffocating quiet, refined over generations, an invisible weapon designed to asphyxiate anyone standing outside their circle of power. I stood there, a crushing weight pressing down on my chest. The glare from the $50,000 crystal chandelier felt like a spotlight on a makeshift gallows. As a senior administrative manager, my brain was hardwired to manage crises in a fraction of a second, to organize chaos into actionable steps. But in that moment, every instinct for control paralyzed. I cast a desperate glance at the people I had spent the last 6 years calling my family. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, a woman who wore her aristocratic pedigree like a suit of armor, didn't so much as fumble her wine glass. She slowly raised the crystal to her lips and took a measured sip. The eyes that watched me over the rim held not a single trace of surprise. Not a single muscle in her face twitched. It was the sharp, profoundly satisfied gaze of a hunter watching her prey step exactly onto the trigger of a trap. Beside her, my father-in-law and the rest of the relatives did the exact same thing. They took a collective, synchronized half-step back. A physical withdrawal, a severing of any association with the pregnant daughter-in-law. In that frozen second, a devastating truth slammed into me. Looking back now, I realize it's a bitter lesson that too many grown women have had to learn the hard way. We are conditioned to smother the warning sirens of our own intuition just to keep the waters of our family life from rippling. We turn a blind eye to the hairline fractures, deluding ourselves into believing that our endless sacrifices will buy us peace. But the truth is, ignoring your intuition never saves your marriage. It only strips away your armor just in time for the firing squad. The signs had always been there. From the moment I announced the pregnancy, Daniel's fleeting warmth had vanished, replaced by a calculated, impenetrable chill. When I reached for his hand during ultrasounds, he would subtly pull away, citing exhaustion. When I voiced the natural anxieties of an expectant mother, he didn't pull me into his arms. Instead, he analyzed my concerns with a flat, emotionless drone, exactly like a corporate executive mitigating a complaint from a lower-level employee. His alienation had dovetailed perfectly with Eleanor's velvet-wrapped daggers. I remembered our afternoon tea just a week prior. She had smoothed her hand over my maternity dress and murmured, "This bloodline demands absolute perfection from its heirs, Ashley. I hope you understand the pressure of carrying our legacy." She never used the word grandchild. She said heir. With every microscopic cut, they had been reminding me of my true place. I was never family. I was a functional piece of biology, an incubator holding the next asset for their massive estate. And now that the incubator had become a liability to their control, they were publicly decommissioning it. I stared at Daniel. The composure on his face wasn't the panic of a husband caught in a lie, nor the shock of a man blindsided by a crazy mistress. It was the absolute ruthlessness of an architect. He wasn't stunned by Vanessa's arrival. By standing there and playing the impartial mediator, he was actively granting her venomous lie total legitimacy in front of an audience. I realized then that I hadn't been stabbed in the back during some impulsive lover's quarrel. I was being terminated from my own life in a boardroom coup that this family had meticulously scripted. I thought the public stripping of my dignity in front of dozens of people was the absolute floor of my humiliation. Until Daniel turned to the family's private attorney standing quietly in the shadows of the room, gave a subtle nod, and calmly asked him to bring out the slate-gray envelope he had already prepared for me. The slate-gray envelope hit the glass coffee table with a hollow clack. It was a quiet sound, yet it carried the weight of an executioner's axe, severing the final thread that tethered me to this family. The lavish dining room, which only 15 minutes ago had been drowning in candlelight laughter and pregnancy toasts, had officially morphed into a silent tribunal. The ultra-wealthy rarely scream. They assassinate you with a far more terrifying weapon, weaponized morality. My mother-in-law Eleanor took a half-step forward. Her flawlessly powdered face arranged itself into a mask of perfectly rehearsed sorrow. She didn't call me a whore. Instead, her voice trembled slightly as she whispered about legacy and responsibility. She spoke of the centuries it took to build their family's immaculate reputation, and how they simply couldn't allow paternal ambiguity to contaminate the future of their true heirs. By wrapping herself in the noble cloak of protecting the family, she legitimized the public shredding of a pregnant woman's dignity. I stood rooted to the spot, my chest seizing with a pain so sharp the room began to blur at the edges. In a state of absolute suffocating panic, I threw a desperate, pleading look at Daniel. The man I had poured my youth into loving was still standing there, his hands resting casually in his pockets, his face as flat and undisturbed as a frozen lake. The second our eyes met, a bone-chilling clarity washed down my spine. Looking back from where I sit now, I want to tell any woman who has ever walked through the storm a brutal truth. When you are being publicly executed and your partner takes a step back, he isn't in shock. He is complicit. True love is an instinct to protect at all costs. If he doesn't throw himself in front of you when the knives come out, his silence isn't confusion. It is an open door, deliberately left ajar, inviting the hurricane in to tear you apart. Then Daniel finally spoke. Not an explanation, not a sigh. He used the smooth, modulated tone of a CEO executing a corporate layoff. Until we get this sorted out, it's best if you leave the house tonight. He picked up the envelope from the lawyer and slid it toward me, explaining that these were just temporary agreements to ensure my departure happened in an orderly fashion without disrupting everyone's peace. Orderly, peace. The elegant words pierced my brain like needles. Daniel wasn't blindsided by Vanessa's forged DNA test. He had anticipated all of it. He wasn't reacting to a jealous lover's ambush. He was executing a pre-drafted legal eviction. Tonight was never a celebration. It was a perfectly laid trap to legally cast me out of my own home. 2 hours later, I found myself slumped on the edge of a bed in a sterile, soulless downtown hotel room. The rattling hum of the AC unit blended with the exhausted, heavy thudding in my chest. I was surrounded by the thick, suffocating quiet of total isolation. Wrapping my arms around my stomach, feeling the tiny life curled up inside me, a single scalding tear broke free. It slipped down my cheek and fell straight onto Vanessa's brown folder, the documents I had blindly grabbed in my panicked exodus. The tear blurred a streak of ink on the DNA results. I blinked. The harsh fluorescent glare from the ceiling lamp washed over the paper. I wiped my face and pulled the page closer. I am a senior administrative manager. For over 15 years, my life has been defined by auditing thousands of rigorous contracts, deciphering complex legal filings, and managing numbers that demand absolute precision. My brain is highly compensated to catch the microscopic anomalies that everyone else misses. And as I stared down at the proof of my own guilt, my professional instincts abruptly woke up, violently crushing the weeping victim inside me. I smoothed the medical records flat against the glass desk. Wait. The font on the medical conclusion was tilted a few pixels off from the clinic's letterhead, a rookie formatting error left behind by someone splicing two different documents together. Vanessa's patient ID began with an outdated string of characters, yet I knew for a fact the state medical system had migrated to a new barcode format 3 years ago. But the fatal flaw sat in the bottom right corner. The printed date on the lab results read the 4th, but according to a faint string of metadata bleeding past the printer's margin error, the file had actually been generated on a Sunday, a day that entire clinic network was closed. My breathing slowed. My trembling fingers suddenly turned steady as stone. That aristocratic family had made one lethal mistake: arrogance. They assumed that if you throw a stack of papers at a pregnant woman, she will go blind with grief. They thought I would carry my shame into the night and run too panicked and broken to ever check the fine print. They forgot what I do for a living. The fragile mourning wife died in that quiet hotel room, replaced by the razor-sharp gaze of an auditor staring at a criminal file. I pulled my laptop toward me, its screen flaring to life in the dark. I logged straight into the family's shared cloud drive, the one Daniel was so certain I never bothered to look at. And before the first light of dawn could tear through the city skyline, I found the first digital footprint proving the truth. What happened in that dining room hadn't been an accident. It had been plotted long before Vanessa ever walked through the door. The ultra-wealthy don't hide their sins under mattresses or in cheap burner phone text messages. They bury them beneath layers of encrypted passwords and sterile legal jargon. The cold glow of the laptop screen illuminated my fingers as they flew across the keyboard. The family's cloud interface displayed hundreds of folders, interwoven like a digital labyrinth. Daniel had given me this lowest-tier access password under the assumption that I'd only use it to upload harmless holiday photos. He hadn't realized that to a senior administrative manager with 15 years of experience, once you slip past the front gate, finding the back door to extract system-wide metadata is only a matter of time. I bypassed Daniel's personal folders entirely. The true architect of a conspiracy never leaves footprints in the obvious places. I aimed straight for the core directory, legal and asset management. At 3:45 a.m., I cracked open a hidden PDF. Its title read, Family Trust Amendment, Strictly Confidential. I skimmed through dozens of pages, choking on dense financial terminology, until my eyes locked onto page 42. The section header was bolded as black and final as a death warrant, the morality clause. The words were like surgical scalpels, sharp and sterile, dissecting my life on the page. According to this ironclad contract, if Daniel were to file for divorce from a pregnant wife without just cause, he would be immediately deposed. He would lose all voting rights on the family board and be forced to surrender half of his personal shares, a fortune worth tens of millions of dollars. But directly beneath it lay a devastating loophole. It stated clearly, should the wife be proven guilty of paternity fraud or gross moral turpitude, the family's entire financial obligation would be rendered completely void. The wife would be thrown out onto the street with nothing. Even more chilling, to protect the family's reputation, this clause mandated that full custody of the child would automatically default to the husband's estate. The room was so quiet, I could hear the faint electric hum of the laptop charger. A freezing dread flooded my chest. That was the reason for the lavish party. That was the reason for the dozens of high-profile guests, the brilliant lighting, and Vanessa's very public entrance. None of this was a cheap soap opera about infidelity. It was a corporate-level conspiracy to seize assets and secure sole custody. They needed a grand stage. They needed me humiliated in front of powerful high society witnesses. They had banked on the hope that the moment a forged DNA test was thrown in my face, I would completely shatter. In that moment, a profound clarity pierced through the fog of my grief, delivering a lesson I want to burn into the mind of any woman who has ever been backed into a corner. We women often share a fatal instinctual flaw. When we are falsely accused, we scream. We cry, we throw things, we tear our throats raw, trying to prove our innocence. But remember this: when the people in power are setting a stage to frame you as a crazy, unstable, and deceitful woman, your greatest weapon is never a scream of innocence. Had I slapped Daniel last night, had I fallen to my knees, wailing, the dozens of security cameras in that dining room would have recorded every second. That footage would be sitting on a judge's desk the very next morning, as ironclad proof of a mother's hysterical, unfit mental state. When your enemy is starved to see you lose control, the most ruthless, destructive counterattack is absolute silence. By maintaining the dead-eyed composure of a corporate manager during the party, by packing my things and leaving in total silence, I had inadvertently snapped the sharpest blade in their trap. Steadying my breath, I typed a new keyword into the internal search bar: Vanessa. It took barely 20 minutes to strip away the other woman's entire facade. There wasn't a single romantic email or a hidden hotel receipt. What I found instead was a wire transfer receipt for $50,000 from a Delaware-registered shell LLC deposited straight into her account. Attached to it was a digitally signed non-disclosure agreement. Vanessa wasn't a mistress. She was a 1099 freelancer, an actress paid to show up at a party and deliver a heavily scripted line. But what made my pupils constrict were the directive emails dictating Vanessa's every move. The tone didn't belong to Daniel. My husband was a man who loved his comfort, accustomed to being coddled, and allergic to complexity. He lacked the mental stamina and the cold-blooded edge to type commands like, "Target must be fully isolated," or "maximize psychological pressure to force subjects' voluntary surrender of rights." That was the aristocratic, clinical, and utterly lethal vocabulary of one person alone: Eleanor, my mother-in-law. She was the true architect of this tragedy. From behind her pearls and charity tea parties, she had personally directed the public execution of her own daughter-in-law. She hired the actress, funded the forged medical records, and used her own son as the front man, all to lock down the family vault and rip her grandchild from the arms of a mother she had always despised. I slowly closed the laptop. The hinge clicked with a dry, hollow snap in the dark. The first light of dawn began to slice gray streaks across the city skyline. Looking at my own faint reflection in the window glass, I realized the submissive, enduring wife from yesterday was truly dead. I stopped asking myself whether Daniel had ever really loved me. Instead, I began to ask, how long had this aristocratic family been planning to steal my child, all while confidently believing they could play the innocent victims forever? For the next few weeks, I turned myself into a ghost. I took an indefinite leave of absence from work and locked myself inside a sterile, soulless, extended-stay apartment on the edge of the city. I went dark on social media, ignored calls from concerned friends, and communicated with Daniel only through sparse, fragmented text messages riddled with deliberate typos. I manufactured long, agonizing stretches of radio silence between replies, flawlessly slipping into the skin of a woman slowly disintegrating under the crushing weight of public humiliation. It was a performance that demanded absolute stillness and agonizing patience. But looking back at those weeks in the dark, I realized a razor-sharp truth. There is no greater tactical advantage than being entirely underestimated. When you let your oppressors believe you are completely shattered, broken, and resigned to your fate, they become arrogant. And arrogance is the most fertile soil for fatal mistakes. By cloaking myself in the pathetic guise of a defenseless victim, I became invisible. I was free to weave a massive net right beneath their noses without triggering a single alarm. On the afternoon of the 10th day since that nightmare of a dinner party, I picked up my phone and drafted a message to Daniel. I meticulously selected every word to sound as pathetic and desperate as humanly possible. Daniel, I'm exhausted. I don't want to fight or drag this out anymore. I'll sign away all my financial rights just to have some peace for the rest of my pregnancy. Tell your lawyer to submit Vanessa's DNA test to the court as the grounds for divorce. I don't want to face a judge or endure any more public humiliation. Please just end this as quickly as possible." I hit send, my heartbeat cool and precise. This was my Trojan horse. I knew exactly how desperate Eleanor and Daniel were to legally sever me from the family. With that forged DNA test officially on the court record, they could trigger the morality clause in the family trust, seize full custody the second my baby took its first breath, and keep their massive fortune entirely intact without paying a single cent in alimony. Their greed and premature triumph would blind them to the most basic risks. While I waited for the prey to take the bait, I executed my second move. I arranged to meet Vanessa at a desolate neon-lit diner tucked away at a highway rest stop. Unlike her cold corporate arrogance on the night of the party, she arrived wearing oversized sunglasses that covered half her face, her eyes darting around the room with paranoid intensity. She slid into the booth opposite me, her hands tightly clasped, bracing herself for a hysterical wife screaming, cursing perhaps a cup of hot coffee thrown in her face. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, offered a faint, hollow smile, and slid a thin manila folder across the Formica table. "Open it," I said, my voice as flat and seamless as if I were delegating a task to a junior clerk. Vanessa frowned, slowly peeling back the cover. The fragile confidence holding her face together shattered in a fraction of a second. It wasn't a file exposing her fake identity. It was a drafted, anticipatory restraining order I had extracted from my mother-in-law's cloud drive. The document was completely filled out with Vanessa's full legal name, date of birth, and social security number. It painted Vanessa as a dangerous extortionist, a delusional stalker, relentlessly harassing Daniel's family after a brief freelance stint. Did you really think a dynasty like that would let a living, breathing liability walk away with $50,000? I leaned in closer, dropping my voice, making sure every syllable pierced directly into her paranoia. "The second I am legally evicted with those divorce papers, this restraining order gets filed. They are going to frame you for extortion. They will obliterate your credit, throw you in a federal cell, or leave you on the street with absolutely nothing to ensure you stay silent forever." Vanessa's lips began to violently tremble. The dark lenses couldn't hide the absolute raw terror of a pawn who just realized she wasn't on the winning side. She was merely the next target slated for execution. Relying on my professional instincts, I didn't use tears or moral pleas to buy her sympathy. I used the cold, hard reality of legal documentation. Faced with the prospect of doing hard time for a family of millionaires, Vanessa instantly broke. She agreed to turn state's evidence right then and there. 3 days later, an automated notification from the state judicial electronic filing system pinged my inbox. Daniel's lawyer had officially filed the divorce petition with the court, and right there attached as Exhibit A, exactly as I had orchestrated, was the forged DNA lab result. A cold, emotionless smile crept across my face, in the silence of my apartment. They had taken the bait. If this deceit had remained confined to the walls of their lavish dining room, it would have been nothing more than a cheap, morally bankrupt family drama. But the exact second Daniel's attorney placed that fabricated DNA test onto a judge's desk and stamped it with the seal of the court, the entire nature of the game mutated. Believing they had already won, Eleanor and Daniel had willingly stepped over the line of domestic manipulation and walked straight into committing perjury and fraud upon the court. In their rush to secure a civil divorce and protect their trust fund, they had turned themselves into federal criminals. By the time Daniel asked her to sign the final papers, Ashley had already built the criminal case that would destroy everyone who thought she was too broken to fight back. Cold morning light bled through the steel-framed blinds of the 42nd floor law firm, cutting sharp surgical lines across the expanse of a polished mahogany conference table. The mediation room was steeped in that sterile, asphyxiating atmosphere unique to old money and absolute power. Eleanor sat there, her spine, rigid legs crossed with an unmistakable aristocratic poise. She wore a pearl-colored cashmere coat, her diamond-clad hands resting elegantly in her lap. Beside her sat Daniel, wearing that same empty smirk, his face radiating the calm entitlement of a man who believed the world was coded to serve him. Together with their family attorney, they sipped sparkling water, waiting with triumphant patience for a broken weeping lamb to walk in and surrender her rights. But the woman who pushed through the glass doors that morning wasn't the one they had humiliated at the dinner party. I walked in the staccato click of my heels echoing with a cold, relentless rhythm against the marble floor. There was no hesitation, no trace of the withered victim. I wore a sharply tailored business suit, my hair pulled back into a severe knot, a thick manila file tucked under my arm. The moment I pulled out the chair opposite them and sat down, meeting the eyes of the people I had once called family, a profound, anchoring stillness washed over my chest. So many women spend their prime years twisting themselves into knots, swallowing their bitter tears, just to beg for validation from their in-laws. They ache to belong to something grand. But the brutal truth is this: you cannot fight for a seat at a table that was explicitly designed to reject you. A woman's worth is never dictated by whether toxic people accept her. Your value is forged in the exact moment you straighten your spine and refuse to let them trample you for 1 second longer. Daniel's lawyer cleared his throat, jutting his chin toward the pre-printed divorce settlement resting on the table. Ms. Ashley, if you sign this waiver of rights today, my client is prepared to offer a modest stipend for your medical— Quiet. I cut him off. My voice didn't rise, but the sheer razor-wire authority in the word made the lawyer choke on the rest of his sentence. I wasn't there to plead or negotiate. I was there to hand down a sentence. I popped the clasp of my file, pulled out the copy of the DNA test Vanessa had thrown in my face, and laid it dead center on the table. Daniel leaned back in his leather chair, practically grabbing popcorn for the tearful apologies he expected. But then, I slowly withdrew a second piece of paper and laid it perfectly parallel to the first. It was a credit card statement. The fatal flaw of arrogant liars. I began shattering the heavy silence of the room, my eyes locking onto Daniel's slowly stiffening smirk. Is that you think paperwork is just dead ink. You throw a document in my face and assume I'll be too blinded by grief to look closer. You forgot that I have spent half my life dissecting the anatomy of corporate fraud. In my world, every document leaves a digital footprint, and more importantly, documents have memory. I extended my index finger and tapped the edge of the DNA test. The sound was as dry as a ticking metronome. The metadata hidden in the margins of this file clearly shows it was generated at exactly 4:15 p.m. on the 4th. Then I slowly slid the credit card statement across the mahogany, stopping it right in front of Eleanor's perfectly manicured, intertwined hands. But there is a fascinating temporal paradox here, I said, raising my eyes to stare unblinking into my mother-in-law's fracturing aristocratic facade. The $5,000 payment to the nameless private clinic that issued this paper was swiped on your personal black card, Eleanor, at exactly 9 a.m. that very same morning. The oxygen instantly evaporated from the room. Eleanor's flawless mask of morality completely disintegrated. Her eyes went wide, her pupils contracting in a surge of raw, unadulterated panic that no amount of expensive foundation could hide. The elegant hands resting in her lap began to violently tremble. "Ma'am?" I lowered my voice to a lethal whisper. "You cannot pay for a blood test in the morning when the blood hasn't been drawn and the paper isn't printed until the afternoon. Unless you are purchasing a custom-printed piece of fiction." Daniel's jaw unhinged. He whipped his head toward his mother, then back to me. "Ashley, what the hell are you talking—" "I'm not done," I interrupted, denying him the luxury of breath. The true execution was just beginning. If this circus had stayed in your living room, it would merely be the despicable act of a hypocritical family. But I turned my gaze to the lawyer, whose face had just drained of all color and was now beading with cold sweat. "The second you submitted this forged DNA test to a judge as evidence for divorce on behalf of your client, you crossed the line from a civil dispute into federal territory." I pulled the final document from my file, a sworn affidavit stamped with a red notary seal. "This is Vanessa's sworn testimony," I announced, sliding the paper toward them. "She has surrendered every directive email, the wire transfer receipt for $50,000 from your Shell LLC, and the draft of the anticipatory restraining order Eleanor planned to use to throw her in jail once she outlived her usefulness. Vanessa says hello, by the way. She chose to cooperate with federal criminal investigators rather than do hard time for you." It was a killing blow. The lawyer dropped his Mont Blanc pen. Instinctively, he rolled his leather chair away from Daniel as if trying to distance himself from a highly contagious disease. He knew exactly what the penalty was for perjury and fraud upon the court. The sheer arrogance, the elite status, and the boundless power of this dynasty were instantly pulverized beneath the weight of the simplest administrative paperwork. Eleanor gasped for air, clutching her chest, her face ashen and completely drained of blood. Daniel sat paralyzed in his chair, his jaw slacked, utterly mute. He was bound and gagged by the very legal system he had smugly thought he could weaponize to destroy his wife. I had violently ripped the truth back from the hands of the most ruthless people I knew. I had shattered their moral cage. But just as I closed my file, preparing to stand up and walk out of that room with the posture of an absolute victor, the pathetic, desperate final words that stumbled out of Daniel's mouth proved the most repulsive thing about his nature. It proved that he never regretted destroying me for a single second. He only regretted that he got caught. The moment I closed my leather briefcase, the brass clasp snapped shut with a dry, hollow click. It was the sound of a guillotine dropping on my existence within that dynasty. I straightened my spine, smoothed the lapel of my blazer, and prepared to walk out of that room with the absolute posture of a victor. But just then, Daniel spoke. "Ashley." His voice was fractured, thick, and trembling. He looked up at me with bloodshot eyes and muttered a sentence that even now I consider the perfect summary of the ruthless elite. "If you had just signed the papers, none of this would have happened." I paused for a fraction of a second. Not a single tear fell. No sudden surge of rage erupted in my chest. Instead, an absolute serenity, cold and clear as glacial ice, washed over my entire being. Those words were the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. Daniel felt absolutely no remorse for destroying me, nor any guilt for attempting to steal my child. His only regret was that his flawless plan had failed and he had been caught. His cruelty didn't stem from impulsive emotion. It was born from a complete and terrifying absence of empathy. In that exact moment, I realized that walking away from this man wasn't just a liberation, it was my only means of survival. I didn't give him the dignity of a response. I simply looked at him the way one looks through a stranger on the street, turned my back, and pushed through the heavy glass doors into the blinding morning sun. The fallout hammered that aristocratic family with a speed and brutality that was nothing short of apocalyptic. The collapse of the ultra-wealthy doesn't happen with loud screaming tabloid headlines. It happens in the deafening silence of heavy mahogany doors permanently slamming shut in their faces. The second federal investigators officially opened a docket based on Vanessa's testimony, the family's elite law firm immediately recused themselves to save their own licenses. Daniel was formally indicted on federal charges of perjury and fraud upon the court. But the most agonizing poetic justice came from the very weapon they had unsheathed to destroy me, the morality clause. Once the fraudulent conspiracy was dragged into the light, the board of directors for the family trust activated that exact clause to depose Daniel. He was stripped of his voting rights, ousted from his prestigious CEO chair, and exiled from the very empire he smugly believed he ruled by divine right. As for Eleanor, her punishment was far more devastating than the loss of capital. For a woman who had spent her entire life meticulously curating a facade of aristocratic morality, the stripping of her prestige was a social death sentence. Whispers began to spread like a contagion through high society. Her name was quietly but swiftly erased from the letterheads of elite charity boards. The wealthy matriarchs who used to sip afternoon tea and nod approvingly at her elegance now avoided her like a plague. Eleanor lost the one thing she valued above her own life, the elevated pedestal from which she judged the world. The punishment fit their crime with terrifying perfection. They had tried to use the law and their reputation to strip me of everything, and in the end, the law and their reputation stripped them bare. Months after the storm finally broke, I sat in the sun-drenched living room of my new home. It was a space defined by profound peace and stillness, entirely free from suffocating crystal chandeliers and the cold, judging eyes of a toxic dynasty. I rested my hand on my swollen belly, feeling the gentle, reassuring kick of the tiny life growing inside me, and smiled. By exposing their fraud with undeniable paper trails, I hadn't just secured absolute uncontested custody of my baby. I had legally forced an independent financial settlement that guaranteed our future, ensuring I would never have to look at their faces again. Sitting there reflecting on the brutal journey that brought me here, I arrived at a truth I hope becomes a guiding light for any woman who has ever been pushed to the edge. The ultimate revenge is not standing over your enemies and watching them cry, nor is it waiting around for an apology that will never come. The most absolute elevated form of vengeance is taking back total control of your life and walking tall into a brilliant future that your abusers can never, ever touch. You do not need the remorse of your enemies to heal. The only thing you will ever need is the truth. They thought they could turn me into a scandal, a submissive signature on a piece of paper, and a compliant silence. But in the end, I walked away with the only things they could never own: my child, my name, and the truth. Looking back at the wreckage the storm left behind, I want to offer a piece of hard-won wisdom straight from my soul to the women watching this video. Never waste your precious grace waiting for remorse from people who meticulously calculated your pain. You do not need the reluctant validation of a toxic dynasty to prove your own immense worth. The absolute purest form of healing isn't found in a tearful reconciliation, but in quietly gathering your truths fiercely, protecting what is rightfully yours, and walking with unapologetic dignity into a brilliant future where they no longer exist. I know there are so many of you out there who have weathered the suffocating betrayals of the very people who were supposed to be your sanctuary. How did you pull yourself from the ashes and seize absolute control of your own narrative? Please share your stories and reflections in the comments below, so we can build a fortress of a community deeply understanding and holding one another up through the hurricanes of life. If this confession resonated in your bones, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your steadfast presence is the vital pulse that keeps us bringing these raw, profound truths to light every single day.